As far as structures, do you think it's realistic that would get significantly addressed this year?
Yeah. Yes.
And as far as everything else, do you think it's realistic players would get an idea of what is prioritized on the roadmap this year?
We just try to be careful about what we share because of because it can't be relied on. Like, it's very hard to commit to a date and then skimp on it, and we're trying to avoid that. We had those pitfalls years ago where we had a roadmap and everyone yelled at us when we didn't deliver on it. So we'd like to keep it more open-ended, but I think I've told you a lot of things that we are looking at in the near to midterm, at least in this podcast. I don't know that I missed anything. Let me check if on my wish list.
Rather than focus on sorry, Artemis.
Off the top of my head, a phrase that is thrown around quite frequently when discussing the industry changes was sort of looking forward to dynamic distribution. Could you give like a more nuanced view of what that means as of right now? Are we in a state of dynamic distribution, or further changes coming? How does that feel and work?
Dynamic distributions we're not there yet. We're in the between. Dynamic distribution is supposed to happen very closely related to iHub upgrades that we have on the roadmap. So with iHubs, we've always wanted to increase the customization and kind of leverage the fact that we made geography matter. So bringing back some of these minerals into nullsec that we removed by choice and cost would be a very interesting choice for alliances and corporations in null. So that's kind of part of the iHub package, if you will. And a part of that is improved UI and UX on that. So additional resources, different combat sites, maybe even these harder combat sites that I mentioned before. So that's all kind of in that nebulous package of distribution, as well as taking into account player action. So we want to keep working on the game fundamentals where your actions actually mean something. And this is something that we've been talking about for 2-3 years now, is that if you we want the universe to react. So you can deplete something or make it more scarce in your area by over harvesting it or overusing it. The first foray was a DPS, and something similar is, or maybe not similar, but like in that vein, is dynamic distribution. So your actions would matter more.
So I want to move into our last question, and I just want to throw this out there, not necessarily for you to respond, Rattati, just to take it in as a point of feedback. You have given us like a lot of things that CCP is working on and looking at, but I think everybody here knows, and certainly the audience should understand, that not all of those things are necessarily equal. There's prioritization. CCP only has so many resources. What gets worked on first is a really big decision for any company. And some changes that might be bigger might take a long time, but are still worth doing ahead of other things that might be faster, that are still important, but we just can't, we got to do this other thing over here. I'm not saying instead of roadmaps or specific lists of things that you're working on, which CCP has put out on a dev blog to their credit fairly recently, I think. But some idea of, or not, some confirmation to the players that like CCP has thought about priority and an understanding of what do you see as the big problems, not what you're going to do to fix them, but what areas are you looking at more closely, and getting CSM and player feedback on the priority list as opposed to specific changes, I think might be an interesting iteration on development communication with the player base.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can share that, for example, iHubs that we wanted to kind of keep working on and use as a kind of baseline into our next large initiative, because kind of fix the economy initiative is kind of at the end of its run. I've talked about wanting to start to do something way more constructive and more fun and more creative this year and kind of start that, and which means that we are, for example, deprioritizing the iHub over structure rework. So we're raising the structures to a higher level of importance at the moment. So we're focusing on that. We think it's going to help some of the combat issues in null and make those fights more interesting than they have been. And that's a focus. We want to kind of get the manufacturing, keep making sure that the manufacturing wheels are turning. So that's another priority. But after that, we're looking at basically new interesting things to work on. But structures is not something that's solved in a patch or two. It's more like we're committing to fixing it over time. We know that there are issues. We'll start with the short and mid and see if we can kind of move the needle a bit on those. And we have already identified with the CSM like the major topics to address.